Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Gerson. I'm the Privacy Counsel here at TerraTrue, and today we'll be chatting with our COO and former GC at Snap, Chris, as well as Liz, the Global Data Protection Officer at Foursquare, about how they've built privacy programs that are agile and can scale. But before we get into all of that, just a few housekeeping items. So first off, if you have a question, feel free to toss it in the questions box or the chat. I'll keep my eye on that, keep the conversation going that way. Second, we are recording the webinar and we'll be making that recording available to you all afterwards. Miles, if you for any reason lose audio or internet, feel free to just rejoin using the same links provided or the dial-in numbers as well. So kind of with all that out of the way, let's get started. Chris, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us how it is that you found yourself here talking about building privacy programs that are nimble and kind of built to scale?
Sure, Gerson. Thank you so much. So again, I'm Chris Handman. I'm the COO and co-founder of TerraTrue. My way into privacy took a few frolics and detours. And it began really with 2014 when I joined Snap as their first GC to help build out that entire legal function, including the privacy function. And the reason why that was so top of mind for the company then was the company had had the unfortunate chance of running afoul of the Federal Trade Commission and got hit with a 20-year consent decree for a few privacy foot faults. What that forced Snap to do early on, this is well before GDPR or CCPA, was to build a very scalable privacy program that was going to be audited, but have to demonstrate that the company understood before they deployed their products proactively that they knew how data was going to be taken, how it was going to be collected, how it was going to be shared, all the things that in some sense companies today are taking for granted as a matter of what they need to do. Snap is sort of first of its kind and really having to do that. And at the same time, really having to harmonize that rigor with a company that was famous for shipping great innovative products at a lightning fast pace. And so traditionally, privacy and compliance don't go hand in hand or aren't synonymous with fast moving, agile businesses. And so we had to figure out a way to really bridge that. And I think we did something that was really effective, helped create great product, great privacy protections, great user trust, but really importantly, really established a process that was repeatable and scalable even on the technology that we had at that time. And so fast forward a few years, my co-founder now at TerraTrue, who was the first CISO at Snap, we realized there was this opportunity to really build that kind of agile platform for companies in this modern new age of privacy. So all's well and good. And one of the great benefits of building these platforms is getting to work with great companies who share those same mindsets. And I know Foursquare is certainly one of them. And I'm so excited we get to hear from Liz today as well.
Me too. Liz has been building a world-class privacy program. And Liz, I was hoping you could introduce yourself too and kind of speak to that a little bit as well.
Sure. So my name's Liz Hein. I am the Associate General Counsel for Privacy Product and Compliance, also the Global Data Protection Officer here at Foursquare. If you're not familiar with Foursquare, we are the leading cloud-based location technology platform. And we really work with a lot of brands and customers to unlock the power of location data, looking at places and movement to really, in better customer experience and really drive better business outcomes. And I joined the company back in May, so I haven't been here quite a year. Prior to this, I was Global Trade and Global Privacy Counsel at HP. Interestingly, HP, as large as it is, I was the only privacy counsel and global trade counsel for about 7 years. I was there during GDPR implementation. Prior to that, I was a partner with a law firm doing global trade. And even though global trade and privacy sound very different, I've actually found that my background in global trade has really prepared me for the career in privacy as products have shifted from being tangible crossing borders. We're really in a world of data products and services right now. And so all of the things I've done and worked with and built global trade programs, I'm translating that to privacy right now. So what we're doing at Foursquare, Foursquare has a very strong stance on privacy. We build it into our products from the get-go. We're really trying to formalize that now. It has already been embedded, but it was somewhat ad hoc, not documented. And that's what we're working to do. We're making sure that from the very beginning of the product lifecycle or the software lifecycle that privacy, we're not only thinking about it, we're documenting the decisions that we make with regard to privacy. We're looking at the risks, we're mitigating. And so I kind of view this as taking an already great program and really advancing it for the next iteration of our company. And as we grow and scale, this will go with us.
That's fantastic to hear about kind of your kind of where you've come and how you kind of come at these issues from. I was really curious, kind of with all that in mind, Liz, what do you think about as sort of the biggest challenges to standing up a privacy program that can scale? And like, how do you make sure that, sometimes privacy teams can be lean, but how do you make sure that they still kind of are able to sort of, punch above their weight without sacrificing visibility and collaboration within their org?
I have yet to meet a privacy organization that's not lean. And I think that is the theme with privacy. And certainly I've been on lean teams, and as the only lawyer at HP, it was a lean team. I think the way I've come at things in the past and having learned from my experiences and what I'm applying here at Foursquare is you have to be very careful not to boil the ocean. And I say that because as compliance professionals, as lawyers, what often happens is you issue spot every little thing that needs to be addressed. And so you have to start to learn to look at things from a risk-based perspective. You cannot come at and fix every issue. So what are your top three risks that you want to start to address? And so I think that is a big challenge. Once you address those risks, or once you identify those risks, it's starting to implement the actions to mitigate. And so for me, one of the things that I identified, not necessarily a risk, but was a need for automation for our privacy program. Taking the privacy team to our engineers and product rather than having a manual process where they had to come to me, set up a call. And so that was one of the things that I identified probably in August last year, and we've really been working towards implementation. In doing that, I would say, things that are a challenge, you have to plan a lot in advance. That's not something that I excel at. I'm not a project manager. That is not my strength. I have a great team that helps me there, but it takes a lot of time to plan out how to implement additional process. And I think that investment up front, creating taxonomies, working with teams on where to put the privacy touch point, I think that all pays off down the road when it comes to implementation. Those are the challenges I've seen.
I was hoping too, Liz, you could talk a little bit. I'll definitely want to get Chris's perspective, but before we get to Chris, I know that Foursquare has been really kind of forward thinking and how to sort of bring in, product folks and engineers and really make them feel like they're kind of co-owners of the privacy responsibility. And I know that, kind of as part of that, Data Privacy Month, in January was a big thing at Foursquare. So I was just hoping kind of to hear about what that's looked like in terms of sort of that cross-functional collaboration.
Yeah, so I think to take it a step back, I view compliance programs as being somewhat tops down. You have to have a great tone at the top. And that was really what we were doing in January. We leveraged the entire month for Data Privacy Month. It was an awareness campaign. We had communications from our CEO, from our chief legal officer, from myself. We rolled out new policies. We rolled out our new Privacy Central online, tried to make things, refreshed, making sure our policies capture truly what we're doing. But in addition to the tone at the top, and the awareness, I feel strongly that you also have to have a grassroots effort for any effective compliance program. And that's where the coordination with your stakeholders, engineering, product, that's where it becomes critical. If you try to implement a compliance program from the tops down, or from legal telling the engineering, here is what your process is going to be, you have a very small chance of success. It is not going to take. And so we've spent a lot of time working with our engineers, with our product teams. We also have a program management office who's been a fantastic partner to us to kind of beta test some of the technology that we're using and trial and error, see what works, see what doesn't work, take their frank feedback sometimes, and try to come at things from a perspective that works for them, that makes their life easier. You're not just imposing more process, you're actually helping them advance the ball, keep them on schedule, keep them, give them the feedback that they need in real time for privacy issues.
That's great. And I listening to that, I instantly wanted to ask Chris for his read on some of that, because I know, Chris, you're so passionate about sort of how streamlining process gets more people bought in and a better kind of end product at the end of the road. So, I'm just curious to hear kind of what your take is on, when Liz talked about building the grassroots through streamlined process kind of an automation. I'm curious for your take on what it takes to make that happen.
It's such a great point, right? The idea that compliance, for it to thrive, especially at modern companies that are accustomed to moving fast, you need to have that buy-in from all of your stakeholders. And privacy is one of those compliance functions that really does touch a number of constituencies across an organization. And if you don't create a system that is tailored to the way they work, you are going to run into outright either resistance or a fatigue that's going to defeat the entire system in the first place. So Liz is exactly right. Like, investing that early upfront thought into developing processes and technologies that can help those teams scale and do their work is absolutely so critical. And one of the things that Liz identified as a culprit that I think really does defeat that grassroots encouragement is processes that are tone deaf to the way developers are working, right? You hit them up with a 50 question template every single time they want to do things that has nothing to do, like 3/4 of that is irrelevant. That is the way most companies have to operate, but you should have a way that eliminates that kind of inefficiency. Coming back to them with the same questions after they've already told you once, right? Once you do a taxonomy, once you tell the data types, once you have a team that's accustomed to working with the same types of data, not being able to leverage that kind of Sisyphusian, ask them the same questions no matter how many times they've answered it in how many contexts, that just breeds a sense of cynicism among product teams and developers who pride themselves on efficiencies. And so I think privacy and legal teams need to understand that you need to have technology, purpose-built tooling, and processes that fit the organization that can help accommodate that sense of speed. And if you can do that, if you make that investment, you actually have a product and a process that really works well. There's a flywheel effect to it that not only then gets you the confidence you have to go to your board and say, we're absolutely crushing it when it comes to our compliance obligations, but you actually become recognized, I think, by product teams as like, oh, legal, privacy, they're not that place that good ideas go to die. They're not that place that like we hate. Like they're helping us empower something. And I think that was a transformation we saw at Snap when we did that. And we've seen that at other companies we've been working with here at TerraTrue. It's an exciting thing to see.
Yeah, and Liz, I would love your take on that. Something that Chris just kind of pointed out is sort of how to, using privacy not just as a compliance function, but a way of really demonstrating value to your cross-functional collaborators, but also to your C-suite. And so I was just curious, Liz, if you could talk at all about like, how you think about kind of showing to your stakeholders that this privacy program really is delivering value for the teams that are working on it.
Yeah, so I think the benefit that I have here at Foursquare is that privacy is so much a part of our brand. It is such a top priority for the company that everybody is invested. And indeed, that was one of our messages in January, that privacy is everyone's responsibility. And so it is, I think the thing that our executive team wants to hear right now is how we're making it easier for the organization. Compliance isn't the issue. We have a good program. It's how do we help the teams speed up in product development, in creating ideas, in engaging with them in real time and making things fast and efficient. Those are the types of things I like to take up to my quarterly reviews with the CEO, to show him how privacy is actually adding to the the business proposition that we have here at Foursquare, that privacy is fundamentally part of what we do at with location data. And so that is the kind of messaging I take up when we do that. And that's really, I guess I just keep coming back to the fact that it's still fundamental for us here, that it makes having a streamlined program makes it easy to go up to him and say, here's what we're doing. We're getting it ready. We're going to be ready to grow with the company. We're prepared.
Can I?
Yeah, jump in, Chris.
Well, I was actually less a comment on that, but to point out that I think that's a great segue. There's actually a question that I think has come in the Q&A, if I'm not mistaken. It's asking, what's the hardest thing to change the mindset of or influence internally in terms of digitizing privacy, culture, people, processes. I'm curious, Liz, do you want to take a swing at that? Like, given that you've had such a recent experience in rolling that out, and I think you've got a lot of executive sponsorship at Foursquare, what have you found to be, in your other past practices or now, like the most difficult thing in changing those mindsets and the influence?
I think the most difficult thing, and I mentioned this before, is not, it's that tops down. It is coming at things like a lawyer, coming at things as you always have come at them. Training because you need to check the box instead of thinking about how to better communicate the message, get the buy-in. And so in my experience, relationships are crucial when you're building any sort of compliance program, not just with your executives, but throughout the organization with your stakeholders. People don't need to be told why to do things. They want to understand. People generally want to do the right thing. They need to feel invested in what they're doing. And so when you develop the relationship, you're bringing them in, you're taking their feedback, you're making them accountable, but also giving them a sense of ownership over the program. So that's how I've come at changing mindset. And I've found it to be very effective.
And I have to say, I feel that exactly the same way. And I'll give like two bookend examples of my experience. The first at Snap, of course, at that point, there was no privacy program to speak of. It was just like ship fast. And there was no privacy software. There was no tooling. This was again in 2014. And so what we had to do was really come up with a system on our own, write that book. And what we did was, listening, like going to heads of engineering, going to product, going to all the business, and really trying to understand, like giving them a sense of like, here are the obligations, here's why it's important to us. And let's try to find something that works. And from all of those listening tours and kind of collaboration, coming up with something that actually felt not just workable, but something that people got behind. In fact, that was one of the most gratifying aspects of it, was that the system that we developed there came to not just help ensure that audits went off without a hitch and there were no deficiencies, but that development teams, engineers came to embrace this actual system because of the transparency that it unlocked. And now fast forward to our time at TerraTrue, I think what we're now seeing is like, this is a platform that's it's designed to do that. It's the benefit of like all of that listening tour. And the goal is to, like, whether it's integrating with Jira or integrating with tools that teams are using, the point is make this as easy as possible for teams to actually go. Show them that there's an empathy to the way you have to work. And they do, like you said, Liz, they want to do the right thing. And so arming them with the ability to continue to do the right thing with a sense that it's not much of a burden on what they're already doing, and that the whatever marginal increase in their duties is actually redounding to their benefit, right? It's making it easier for them in the future. It's making them smarter about the way you're using data. It's informing decisions and better. That is something that people totally can buy into, right? And then it's less about selling that box checking exercise of a compliance function and more about selling like something that truly makes product better.
Yeah. Chris, it reminds me too that when you force something on an organization or a team, they will not only not adopt it, they will go around. Yeah. And I think back to an experience that I've had with tools that, even I didn't adopt them because they didn't fit into my workflow. But with engineering and product in particular, when I spent a lot of time this summer, basically on the listening tour, like you said, I've learned all about Jira, for example, and I gained an understanding of a tool that we don't use in the legal world.
Right.
But it became very clear to me that unless I went to our teams with something that synced with how they work,
Exactly.
I was not going to be successful in how they work.
100%.
The other piece of it now that I'm learning, and it's really interesting, you know, every organization has their own method of communication. Some are emails, some are phone. I'm coming from one that was probably more phone calls and meetings. And I'm now really shifting from phone calls, meetings, emails to, you know, Slack. Everything goes really fast. And to be able to communicate in real time through Jira or through TerraTrue, for example, or some of our other integrations, that is critical for the success of our business.
I think that's so critical. I mean, I think that, look, the idea of privacy remaining this siloed function, right? That kind of just sits off in its own corner, waits reactively for teams to raise their hands and let them, hey, I think I might have an issue. And then all that breakdown in communication. And I think those days are frankly limited, if not over already, for companies that really are taking their privacy obligations seriously and really want to get ahead of the curve as new regulations come down the pike, right? Because you just accumulate more debt the longer you postpone these sorts of initiatives. It makes it that much harder to accommodate new stances. And so finding ways that privacy can shift left, this whole idea of like getting it into, as you said at the outset, the thought process, the product ideation, and really be a seamless constituent, a partner from that ideation on through implementation phase of your development, and not just hope and pray after the teams deploy it that the data is being collected correctly or using it in ways that are permissible. That is absolutely so critical. And it all gets back to that trust you earn, the empathy that you have for the teams, that ultimately you're asking them to do this. And the less you ask them to do, and the more you just make it a natural extension, that again, I think I think you've hit on that spot on.
And sorry, Jason, we're really spinning on this question, but it's a great one. Not just the engineering and product teams. What I've found everywhere, I've never found an organization that didn't want privacy support. People want to do the right thing. They want to understand it. There's pressures on my team. You know, we're lean. We can't be in every single discussion. And so how do I staff my team? How do I resource my team to be able to engage where we need to be engaged and to provide the support? And so tools that not only help privacy or engineers and product managers they're ending up helping us a lot too, because we're able to go quickly through things. We're able to spend a short amount of time. And I can also, you know, when we're involved in these conversations, when we see the privacy touch point at the very beginning of product development, that gives me an opportunity to plan, how are we going to staff this? What are the resourcing needs from my team? So it's going both ways.
And that gets to your point around just, again, limited bandwidth and limited resources that privacy teams have, particularly when compared to the business function, whether we're talking about engineers or product teams or sales teams. You know, we're talking 10x, 100x, 500x multiples, right, compared to what you have on a privacy team in terms of personnel. Yeah. And so the need at this stage, as especially laws become increasingly balkanized and complex, and there's these patch quilt of regulations, trying to keep track of what the various idiosyncrasies are and how any of them relate to any new feature your teams are developing, that's a Herculean task for any one particular privacy person. Now multiply that by, you know, if you're doing your job right and you're getting all of that information from your teams before they're building, that's really difficult. So you need some way, some technological way to help amplify your voice and make them self-empowered, right? Return that real-time feedback for them, automate a lot of that, map that against those laws. And again, that's all sort of the instincts that we had at TerraTrue, was to kind of empower privacy teams to make up for that lack and really ensure that you have that confidence that you know and you're supporting your teams, and nothing's falling through the cracks, that there's also someone at your back, right, as well, and that you don't have to like be the savant who's actually like digging down into the most obscure annotations of the California AG's guidelines to figure this.
Yeah, Liz, I'd love to hear from you too. I mean, how you think about sort of keeping the team agile, kind of and nimble as you get that patchwork that Chris mentioned of sort of evolving laws and kind of sometimes maybe conflicting laws, right? In some ways.
Yeah, with a lean team, you tend to have to approach privacy with a global view. And so when you do that, you tend to take the most restrictive law and use that as your framework to build off of. But that doesn't mean you still don't have conflicts in other places. And so what's tough as a privacy professional now, and I think we all can relate to this, is everybody has some form of the Excel spreadsheet that has GDPR provisions down one side with the matching CCPA provisions going down another side and trying to match it. And it's just become unwieldy and untenable. And so having that automated, also having the ability to go back and look at products that have already been reviewed to determine whether there are gaps in existing products, that's critical for us. And that's something that we really do look to AI, machine learning, automation, anything we can do that can help us flag issues with products that have already gone through a pretty comprehensive privacy review. So those are the things we're looking at. The other piece that I think helps us stay on track is my team has each person has their own lane. We overlap to some extent, but it's very clear that I have one person handling our data subject rights management. I have somebody handling our third-party risk management. That makes communication a lot clearer. They know which teams they need to be communicating with. They can activate their networks, and their networks are a little bit smaller. And so when we do have to make changes, that I've found that the clear roles and responsibilities coming from my team helps implement broadly.
One of the things that, Liz, that you mentioned, I think that is so critical is that idea that it's, privacy it never stops, right? Because your teams continue to make new products, but the laws continue to change. And so it is, as these new laws come down, as new regulations come down, you want to avoid that no matter how, you may have done great reviews for GDPR for the last 2 years. Now suddenly CPRA's here, or Virginia, or Colorado, or the next law done. You don't want to have to feel like you have to go back and repeat that GDPR preparation exercise every time a new law comes down the path. And yet so much of what happens today at companies that kind of had the old school, we're going to document it on a Google Drive or a Word doc and have it there. It's all instruction and really difficult to really figure out what have we shipped that needs to actually be remediated. And I think that's, again, one of the things that we've really wanted to focus on. And it sounds like, again, I know that you guys have been it's been a top of mind concern, is ensuring that there's a sense of scale and a sense of efficiency, that you're not, every effort you do in your privacy program is efficiently repackaged into a number of different outputs and can be repurposed when necessary. A push of a button, understand what's that gap analysis, right? One quick view to understand, okay, this law has now changed. I'm going to use it. I can map it against everything I've done. I know exactly where I need a signal, send a JIRA ticket out to someone to remediate. That ability, and then your teams appreciate that, as opposed to pinging your developers or your PMs and saying, hey, there's a new law that's changed. Can you please go back and review all of your old JIRA epics to find out what might be affected? That's just not a sensible way of approaching things.
And maybe to that end, Chris, we've talked kind of about the importance of proactive privacy and like you said, shifting left. Maybe Chris and Liz too, I'm really curious to just hear kind of the pain of a reactive privacy program where you're building, you're looking backward and you're going, oh no, this code, it doesn't really align with best practices or NIST or FIPS or whatever, and what it looks like to have to kind of look backward and in a reactive way build from scratch instead of sort of catch it before it becomes an issue and kind of in that proactive kind of agile way.
I can speak to that. HP, massive company, 80, 90 years old now, and Sometimes the systems there felt like they were 80 or 90 years old, and the products had been around a long time. Printers are ubiquitous, they're out there. Having to go back and do a GDPR type of analysis on a printer that's been around for ages and the technology stack is already built, it's challenging for a privacy team. You have to start thinking about what risks are acceptable and what it's reactive. It's tough, and coming here, we aren't a product company in the sense there's no tangible good, but dealing with data, it does give you some more flexibility. But when I've got the engineers and the product managers thinking about this, when they create their, we call them PRDs, that's what creates the epic. That's where we have a privacy touch point. There's already thinking about not just privacy by design, but how are we collecting the data? Is it consent? How long are we going to keep this data? We know Liz is going to ask that. That makes life a lot easier. And once we build in some of these fundamental principles that we'll continue to see in privacy laws, then I feel like we've done our job, and I feel like we've made life a lot easier for our clients.
So I'd say there's really three things that reactive programs just cause too much mischief for companies. One is that they're highly inefficient. Right? If you have to, the whole nature of a reactive program is like you have to go back and redo things, and that's not only a huge tax on the privacy teams that we've already talked about are pretty shorthanded, but it's a huge tax on the business to force them to like interrupt their sprint cycles, their work that they're doing, and have to re-architect things or reinvestigate. Huge inefficiencies. Two, the related point is that it breeds a lack of confidence in that trust that we were talking about that's so critical to building a program that actually depends upon a sense of trust and a shared cohesion around we want to make product better, we want to get, as opposed to we want to block. And I think anytime privacy comes in a reactive space, they end up necessarily being on their heels and almost having to apologize. And just, I think it ends up being a situation that just breeds a little bit of resentment from the business. And then the third is that it creates risk, right? If you're being reactive, you're necessarily operating with a little bit of a blindfold on. And that's where we all know problems can occur through without any sort of maliciousness, things can happen. And if you have a really well-run, scalable, proactive approach that Liz was talking about, where you are collecting and understanding in a really easy way from your teams, how they're going to collect, what data, how they're using it, where it's going, how long it's being retained for, and that's being mapped automatically. They can clone it, they can like leverage what they've done in the past, so that whole process ends up getting faster and faster. Like that just ensures not just that you don't have to be reactive, but it also ensures a sense of reliability, right? There's a repetition and an ability for you to understand that, hey, we're feeling a lot more confident. So I just think those reactive days are really limited at this point.
The other piece I would add is it's expensive. And sometimes it's hard to sell that to stakeholders, to people who are planning, to people who hold the budget, that you sometimes need to make the investment up front as opposed to later. But I think a lot of companies have seen that now. You have infrastructure that needs to be moved, and people are now thinking localization has changed the ballgame in a lot of areas. So in the past, where people were centralizing their data storage, now people are thinking, well, maybe we need to regionalize. And so when you start to think about that at the beginning, I strongly maintain you are going to be saving costs at the end.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I saw another question just came in, and it's a great, really thoughtful question for you, Liz, which is asking about, so you mentioned, some of this stuff requires real investment to get right. And when you're having those conversations with C-suite, board of directors, internal teams, what metrics are you leaning on the most? Or are you looking to the most when you're thinking about substantiating like the ongoing business case for privacy tech?
Yeah, we're still building out our metrics here at Foursquare, but just recently we've made some changes to how we're handling our data subject rights process, and based on some of the insights we were seeing from the metrics we just set up, I was able to go to the product team and say, I'm seeing something go on here. Can you look into it? And sure enough, there had been an issue in a particular country that then resulted in a number of data subject requests coming in. So I do think, like with data subjects, you get insights to what your customers are thinking, how they react to different updates. I've seen that in my past before when an update was rolled out and then suddenly the privacy mailbox blows up. That tells you a lot about what your customer is thinking about your brand. Third parties are another area that I like to keep metrics on. I view third parties as being a primary area of risk for companies, not just in terms of, for us, not just in terms of data, where we get data, but also who processes our data. I like to have those insights. I like to have a system that can substantively look at our compliance efforts, that can help us look at things in a, I guess, subjective is the word I'm looking for, a subjective way. No, I wanted to say objective, an objective way. Right now, when we're looking at third parties, we're looking at them subjectively, sorry. We want to look at them objectively. How do we score third parties? How do we really understand the risk? How do we engage with them and partner? Those are the kinds of things I like to report up on, as well as just what kind of data we're using, where it's being used across the tech stack, where the types of data will gauge the risk. So it also informs our security efforts as well, which is tremendously important, especially right now. Those are a few.
And Chris, feel free to weigh in on that as well, sort of as folks are thinking about when you were at Snap, right? And when you were having to, for better or for worse, right? You also had a hefty FTC consent decree to wrangle with that was something else to consider. But how did you broach these conversations with executives?
Yeah, I mean, look, nothing focuses the mind like an FTC consent decree when trying to marshal executive sponsorship for things. But I think, look, the good news, I think, at almost all companies is, as Liz said, people want to do the right thing, and increasingly the backdrop of GDPR and California and the rash of laws we see, I think privacy and even the concept of privacy being a human right, I think people are getting that, and that is influencing what companies think of as the right thing to do. The question and the challenge for them is, how can we do the right thing in a way that feels accessible and scalable and doesn't impinge on the way we operate? And so as you think about talking to the C-suite or the board, it is a matter of talking about like having an ability to ship great product, not bottleneck your productivity, and demonstrate that you are capturing information around that helps you meaningfully identify, make better product, mitigate risks, understand, in fact, what in fact you are doing, the data you're using and how you're using it, and also being able to plot it over time. Is see the evolution of are you now suddenly using new types of data over the last few quarters that you hadn't been using before? Are you using it in different ways that you hadn't used it? The number of vendors you happen to be using, all of that is a way of informing both the way product is working as well as the efficacy of your privacy program. And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting that we've been focused on at TerraTrue, right? Is like we allow those, we surface those analytics to folks immediately, those dashboards for leaders, and as a way of like really thinking of privacy as part of the way you think about product. And so I think the more you think of privacy as accelerating those product decisions, I think it really helps like captivate the way C-suites and others think about getting on board and seeing the way privacy has this tangible impact and the way they can actually now visualize it.
I'll add one more that came to me as you were talking, Chris. It shows for us some areas where we can make improvements in terms of automation as well. So it is helping with the whole goal of scalability. We're very fortunate, not only do we have a great program management office, we have a group of privacy engineers, and that is their job to help build privacy into our systems and products. And so when I'm seeing a surge in data subject requests that people are unable to log into their accounts and conduct their own deletion, I take this to the privacy engineers, it becomes a problem to solve and automate and reduce the churn that my team has in dealing with the data subject rights. So it does go to the scalability as well of the program.
Listening to all this, I'm thinking about, folks who are listening in, right? And they're hearing about, the really top class, program that Foursquare has assembled. But I could also imagine that there are some folks on the call that, maybe they're just getting to the maturity level where privacy is finally becoming a real priority, and they're hearing about the importance of collaboration and culture building and all that's important and nice, but they're almost at the step of like, wait, I don't have a data map yet, or I don't have like a process yet. Like, so kind of getting to that concrete bit, like if you're saying you're running the race for the first time, what are you telling people to focus on first? Is it getting your taxonomy together? Is it DPIAs and LIAs? What are those sort of concrete first few steps that are like tangible that you kind of have them focus in on?
Yeah, it goes back to the boiling the ocean. There's just so much to do in a privacy program, and you really have to take a risk-based approach. For me personally, I've always viewed anything that has an external component to it. So things that touch your consumers, or that they could interact with you on. I've always viewed those not necessarily as high risk, but there's an external touch point, meaning they can complain. They can complain to regulators, they can complain to the media. So I view that as a high priority with us. We want to keep our customers happy. It's their data. We want to encourage the trust they have in us to keep the data. So anything involving data subjects, I tend to prioritize because it's important. It's, their rights. You have to respect them. But it's also, I think, I don't want to say an easy place, but it's something you can see, you can address, and you can see tangible results fairly quickly by implementing a process there. I think too that if privacy impact assessments are critically important as well. I think that more so than the documentation, even, which of course the documentation is required by law and we have to be doing that. But if you're just building the program, that's where you're going to, I think, get the most bang for your buck, learning about the products and learning about how the teams work. And I think once you have that insight, and you're not only getting the insight and working with them, you're creating the PIA as you go along, you're starting to see the risks within the business and within your products. And so those are the two areas that I would focus on first.
Chris, how does that sound to you?
Yeah, no, I think that all makes perfect sense. And obviously different orgs might have different priorities based on the nature of their business and all that. But I think that's a great starting point. And I think the more important point I would say is really it's the corollary of what Liz was saying about not wanting to boil the ocean, which is like just getting a start is really important. It doesn't. No one is ever no company in the history has ever rolled out the perfect privacy program on day one. These are by definition sort of iterative exercises, and they will always change. And I think you have to be comfortable with that sense of indeterminacy, that as you roll things out, there will be gaps. And the point is that rolling it out sooner is going to make it less painful down the road, because it's not a question of will you need to do this? It's really a question of like, how early do you want to get started? And how willing are you able to take that investment on today? And just getting started with like basic processes, simple saying, hey, look, we as privacy, we want to understand what your teams are building. Like we just want to have a better visibility into what's coming down the pike. Let's create and we can do that in a really slick, automated way that ties in with your geo production. Okay, and sell people on that. And then from there, we can say, like, we want to create, just get a good handle on what is the data we've been using. And because the reason why we want to invest this now is like we can make that process of change as we go forward really fast for you. So work with us on building those taxonomies, building those inventories, and we're going to make your lives so much simpler, and we're going to be able to work, be agile and more nimble as laws come down the pike. I think those sorts of like initial first steps as you think about a proactive privacy program can just go incredible distances in helping get things off the ground. And from there, these are like iterative changes that I think all speak for themselves.
I also look at, it's true. I think there is no such thing as compliance as an end state. Compliance is always a spectrum. It is always moving. You're never going to get to a finish line because there's a new law, there's a new product. Everything is moving. And so you're right. Just making a start helps. Getting some easy wins always feels good. And coming at things with a sense of flexibility, I've found as well. People are looking to your organization as a privacy function to help them understand what is the highest risk. They'll do it, but they need to understand where in their roadmap it needs to fall. And so not everything has to be a priority one. Yeah. And I think when you understand that and respect that, then you start to form those relationships with the business as well.
And maybe that leads us kind of back to that relationship with the business, Chris, to, oh, I see. Actually, before we get to that, I see we have another question.
It ties in well, I think, with where you're going to go, Jason. So that's good.
Okay. So the question is from someone attending who said, I've been thinking a lot about organization design within the privacy function, legal versus PMs versus other roles and responsibilities, and layering on top of that, obviously, some operating rhythm with peer teams like InfoSec and privacy engineering. There are lots of ways to think about that. And what have you seen work, and what have you seen not work? I'll leave it to Liz to take the first stab at that.
What I have not seen work in my experience is having a lawyer be a project manager, mostly because that's me and not my skill set. So I recognize that is an area where I need support. I need the help of someone to break things down into bite-sized pieces to build out an actual program or project. I'm good with the vision, but I need someone on the ground able to interact and help build things out, have the plan, execute on that plan. I've also seen, this is less about the organization and more how you come at it. I think you need to be very clear with each person's roles and responsibilities. There's always going to be some level of overlap, but if you're shifting roles and responsibilities a lot, somebody's on point for this for 3 months and then they're shifting, I think that becomes challenging just with the team dynamics. And so, like I've said, we've really got our team divided up to focus on very specific things right now. As we roll out the program, perhaps that'll change in the future. Whether privacy at Foursquare sits within legal, we're all in legal. Privacy at HP was the same way. I've seen it in compliance organizations. I think that's really just up to the company and how they're structured. I think there's a role for the lawyer. I think there's a role for program managers and project managers. I think what's really critical, though, is that there's a good relationship between whoever's setting the vision, the lawyer, and the people who are executing on that vision. There needs to be clear direction. You all need to be on the same page as to where you're going with the program.
Look, I would say the last point that Liz said is so critical, right? Those organizations, I think it will really depend on the nature of the business and the culture that's been brought up. We increasingly see, first of all, we see privacy often rolling up to legal, but at a growing number of companies, we see privacy a function of the CISO suite, in some measure because privacy and security you can think of as really two sides of the same coin. So I don't think there's one like platonic ideal of the way you structure it. I think the important point is that there's close coordination between each of those. And that to me is the important. It's one thing to, of course, recognize that. The question is how you deliver on that coordination, because the challenge with organizations where you are fortunate enough, where you have actual privacy engineers, and you have AppSec folks, and you have privacy, you've got a pretty robust compliance team there. And I think in the past, the tendency has been that each of those functions ends up creating their own little fiefdoms, not on purpose, but just like they've got their own workflows, they have their own lines of communication into the business that they want to get information from. And what you end up doing is creating a inefficiency, right? Each of these compliance functions has their own independent site. They're often duplicating each other's questions or inquiries. And it's one of the things that we've really tried to break down at TerraTrue, like create one platform where everyone can come together and one workflow that can smartly send workflows out to the teams that need to know about it and say, hey, you need to review this. You don't need to review this because this has nothing to do with you, what you're concerned with. Create an automation to that process to really ensure that there's a single source of truth around your compliance, security, AppSec, trust and safety, whatever those functions happen to be. And I think that if you have the right tooling and technology, can go a huge way in creating a huge, well-rounded compliance function that's holistic and the business buys into.
And actually that leads perfectly into the next question we got that just came in, which sort of is going to challenge, I think, Chris, you to kind of answer the other side of the coin a bit. I think what the spirit of this question, yeah, as far as I can tell, is, great. I understand how important it is to have flexible and nimble privacy programs that move at the speed of a business. But I think the point of this question is basically asking, hey, at the end of the day, a privacy program will also need to withstand the scrutiny of auditors potentially, or regulators, and folks that might not have the same heart or empathy for flexibility, right? And so how do you kind of, great that we've got a nimble program in place, but at the end of the day, how do you make sure your kind of fundamentals are still covered in terms of sort of controls and checks?
Right. I think in some sense, it's a good question, because I think so much of what we've been talking about has assumed as table stakes that the programs we're talking about that are agile are, of course, at the end of the day, still robust and rigorous and can satisfy those demands. And that really is kind of like the thesis of this conversation. Like you can't, of course, agility without rigor is not a privacy program. It's just window dressing. And what you need to do is have something that can give your C-suite, your board, and ultimately the regulators, when they do come knocking, a sense of two things, right? One, that you actually have the goods, you have the receipts, you've got the documentation, you've shown that you've done the work, not just that you've done the work, but you've actually been careful in the way you've thought about that. And again, this is where I think for too long, there's been this assumption that if it's rigorous, it must be terrible and slow and burdensome. And we want to kind of break down that kind of old school assumption. But the other thing around that is like having that program in place, an agile program that shows you're embedded into the business, that but even if and you shouldn't be missing anything, but just having that program, by the way, goes 99% of the way in satisfying a regulator that you guys cared, right? Like you've actually built a system that shows good faith and a desire to get things right. And as we think about those fateful days when the regulators come knocking and ultimately if fines are being levied, look, the difference between a $100 million fine and a warning is in many ways the element of that good faith. The companies that show that they've really tried hard are not going to get sanctioned or get sanctioned nearly as hard. And so I think, again, this all gets back to why building those programs with the sense of like, let's start somewhere today and get this going. It pays huge dividends and long tail returns down the road.
And when I think about agility too, an agile privacy program, I don't think about it that we're giving anything up. I think about it in the sense that we're able to communicate and work as the business, as the product, as the engineer teams are working. We are able to flex to help them move forward. We are not compromising on our principles or our risks, and we absolutely have a controls-based program. I have the controls framework that I reference quite often. Everything we do, I've been very careful to plan from the privacy statement, from our privacy policies. How does that carry into the taxonomy that we're using in TerraTrue? How are we using that to train our engineers and product folks to be able to fill this out? But at the end of the day, even though I'm taking the privacy review to them and we're communicating in Slack, it's documented. I have the evidence. I can show that we did a DPIA when necessary, or a privacy impact assessment. I can show that we took into account how we're going to do the data transfer if we need to. Those are the controls I need, and I have the documentation. So Agile I don't think I'm giving up a thing in terms of compliance.
And look, this gets to the core point. Like I'd mentioned earlier, like this whole idea, like a privacy program, everything you put into that program should actually return like a 5-10x dividend, right? So when you do some input, we at TerraTrue, for example, want to make sure that that work automatically maps to your data map, automatically updates your ROPA, automatically creates audit logs that can be automatically creates those LIAs and DPIAs. So the point is you can leverage technology in a way to ensure that the good work you're doing is being amplified across multiple channels and in a way that's going to prove to the regulators you've been doing your work, but you just haven't had to do it 5 separate times.
I love that, and I love that, you know, avoiding to have to do the same work 5 separate times. I think it's the perfect note to I think end on. Liz and Chris, thank you both so much for sharing your insights and perspective. It's been such an interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you both taking the time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you, Jason, for hosting, and Liz, it's always been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you.
Likewise, thanks.